Hi everyone, Peter Albrecht joined by Jon Gray of Strategy Research, and we're talking about a poll that Strategy and News 5 ran this week. We thank the more than 2,000 people, John, who participated in that poll. And let's take a look at the results here as we are less than 2 weeks away from the election. And on the Republican side, Mobile County Commissioner Jerry Carl leads with 29%. 21% say they plan to vote for Bill Hightower and 13% for Chris Pringle. And then we've got a couple of candidates from Baldwin County in the low single digits, and then undecided. Nearly 1/3 of people who say, John, first off, that they plan to vote in the Republican primary are saying that they are undecided. When you see that, are you surprised by that figure?
Peter, I'm not surprised. And we've talked a lot about how television advertising and how much money candidates are spending. And I want to explain to people out there who have an interest in this how that works. You know, there are a lot of ways to contact people. You can do it through a digital medium like social media or on the web. We do direct mail to people's houses. We used to run used to run newspaper ads. And of course, we don't do as much of that anymore with print. I've actually seen a candidate who's bought a lot of billboards to try to raise his name ID. But the vast majority of ads these days in communications are on television right where we are, because not only are you on TV, but you're in social media, you're on the digital platform on the web. And so we can look at a lot of these numbers by how people are spending their money. We've been talking here for the last few weeks just exactly about that information. Jerry Carl was spending the most money, Bill Hightower was spending the second most money, and Chris Pringle was spending the third most money. And that's almost exactly how you see the numbers track down. So I don't want to say that everything in a campaign is predicated by how much money you spend. Obviously, sometimes how much money you raise has to do with how much people like you. So it can be a bit of a chicken and an egg. But I do think in this particular race, a lot of what we're seeing is predicated by how much money they're spending. Because, Pete, remember, Jerry Carl's a county commissioner. Bill Hightower was a state senator. He ran for governor. And Chris Pringle is currently serving in the House of Representatives. So these are three really well-known people. I think in the end it's coming down to money. And this is going to come down to a race at this point between Jerry Carl and Bill Hightower.
Okay, let's talk about these guys individually and what they're taking away when they see these figures tonight. Jerry Carl, you're in the lead by 8 points. What do you take away if you're Jerry Carl?
Well, I think Jerry Carl's very happy tonight. I think Bill Hightower, having run a gubernatorial race in a much more statewide regional atmosphere, there were some considerations early on, including me, in thinking the Bill would be a little better set to take this on a bigger platform. Jerry Carl has done a great job. His signs are out everywhere. It's not just that he's hit the high points. He has really backfilled with door knocking and the grassroots effort. And of course, he's led on television. So I think Jerry Carl's a very, very happy man right now. The one advice I would have for Jerry Carl is, you know, don't be the hare. Be the tortoise. Don't stop doing what you're doing because this poll number comes in. This poll doesn't matter. This is a poll of what our respondents said sitting on their couch pushing a telephone button. None of them had to get out in the rain and actually go vote. That lead is not substantial, and that'll bring me to Bill Hightower.
Yeah,
Bill Hightower's been here before. Okay, he's run a lot of races. If you remember, he first went to the state Senate running against a gentleman named Jim Barton, who was the chairman of the general fund in Alabama, the biggest budget that we have, and he was chairman of that budget. He beat him in that race in a runoff. So Bill's done this before. He knows what's going to be required of him, and at this point, it looks like he's in a runoff. Both Jerry Carl and Bill Hightower have been in runoffs before. And what's really interesting to the viewers out there, they're both friends. So I think that we may have the opportunity to see a clean race going into the runoff, something we don't always get the opportunity to see. But I think that the way that this is panning out with this very small divide of single digits between these two candidates, anything could happen. Well, Bill Hightower could end up on the top before Election Day.
Well, let me ask you about Chris Pringle. On one hand, he could say, oh man, I've only got 13%. On the other hand, he's saying, look, I'm only 8% out of getting into a runoff, right?
No question. And what I was just talking about a minute ago, Bill Hightower is putting more money into television. He's getting ready to start a new ad. What if that ad doesn't work? What if that ad turns people off? And Chris Pringle's got a great ad out there talking about Nancy Pelosi and the wall and what he wants to go to Washington, D.C. to fight for. And by the way, that's the exact same message he's given at the forums that I've been to and where I've seen him speak. So I will completely agree with you. 8 points is nothing. He could absolutely close this gap. Something could happen with Bill Hightower. But I'll also tell you this, I don't think Chris Pringle is surprised. I think that he understands that money was what he needed to get to. And unfortunately, sometimes when you're doing your job representing the people in the legislature, it makes it difficult to get out there and do all that campaigning. Chris is a good person. He's run a good race. I think he's proud of where he is. I know he wants to do better, but he's not out. You're right.
Let me ask you, in general, do candidates like seeing poll results this close to an election, or are they put off by it?
It makes me nervous. I know that, I mean, we do internal polling and internal tracking, and, I have, well over 100 clients that I've worked with over the last 2 decades, and I am well known. I don't tell my clients poll numbers. I will lie to them and tell them the wrong numbers because essentially it gets to your head. Everything does.
But does the campaign, if you're in a campaign, do you want to know those numbers?
The right people know the numbers, but your question was about the candidate, and sometimes you don't want the candidate because subconsciously we'll stop. I mean, think about it. If you've got a student in school who's an A+ student and they get accepted to a good university, they may mail it in the last 2 months. You don't want that to happen with your candidate. But yes, the people who are involved in these campaigns, this is not a surprise to them. They may feign surprise if asked by the media, and they may, the polls don't matter. The only poll that counts is on election day. I think I wrote that. But at some point, you have to make hard decisions, which is why we're seeing Bill Hightower's spend come up here in the last few days, is because they're aware of a shift in the numbers. They're aware that Jerry Carl has spent more money than he was anticipated to spend. And their plan, as I see it, was to wait for the runoff. I'm not saying that's a bad plan. If you want to talk strategy, this is not a winner-take-all. They're going to a runoff. So to the viewers out there, if you want to play chess, here's your scenario. Do you spend all of your money to get in the runoff and go into the runoff completely broke and have to start over again raising money? Or do you hold back an amount of money, spend just enough to get into the runoff, but then have a war chest full of money to come out with? 2 different strategies. Jerry Carl is spending a lot of money to raise up name ID and get his positives and have a lead. Bill Hightower is holding back a lot of money and only spending what he needs to get in the runoff. Chris Pringle is spending everything he has in hopes he can make it to the runoff. But the 2 front runners right now have a very different strategy, and I think the viewers out here can watch it, play your own game at home, figure out what your strategy would be.
All right, let's talk about the Democratic side, John. And if we look at those numbers, we see Kiani Gardner has 25% at this point, followed by James Averhart at 21%, Rick Collins at 14%. And we televised the debate a couple of weeks ago, introduced these people to the community. But when you see a 40% undecided mark, that still is an indication that these 3 are pretty much unknowns out there.
Complete unknowns. And Pete, I'll be honest with you, it could have been 70% undecided. There may be a lot of finger touching going on the telephone pad when people are guessing here, because outside of your televised debate, I don't know that any of these people have been on television since or will be. It is expensive to run television ads. And because of where we're situated in the 1st Congressional District, a Democrat raising money is not, it's not out of the question. It's just difficult because of the metrics that we have here in the history in this voting area. Now, when you look at the people who are running, I can't tell you that I know any of them very well. I do know one person on that ballot. I knew him previously. He's run for office before. I think that there is a wide open slate here. This race absolutely could go to any one of those candidates because it's a bit of Russian roulette. You don't know who you're voting for. Now, they will probably have people that will go out and knock on doors. You have ADC, which is the Alabama Democratic Conference, and you have New South, which is another portion. These are people that if you go to vote, you'll see people handing ballots out that have a name circled. These are endorsements. This is how the Democrat Party operates. They tend to make their recommendations more on shoe leather than they do with television because of the money. So they'll have their get out the vote work. They'll have the churches out there talking. They'll have their ballots being handed out, and they will make their decision. The other thing you have to consider is a large portion of the Democrat voters are African American voters. And especially in the South, we run into this all the time in polling. They will not always tell you on the telephone what they think about something. They don't know you. They don't know who's calling. And if you remember, it's not so terribly long ago that they were oppressed and their voting rights were not in existence. And in fact, even in the first few decades that they were terribly pushed back and even threatened to exercise those rights. So we have to remember when we do this in the polling business that just calling up Democrat households and saying, hey, who would you vote for? It's a completely different mentality. So in this Democrat race, with as low voter turnout as I would expect, and with as little money being spent on those candidates, I would tell you that race is wide open.
All right, and of course that seat's been held by a Republican going all the way back to 1965.
Yes, sir.
Jon Gray with Strategy Research, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week.